Okay, let's continue. Let's continue where we left off. So last thing we talked about was conflicting demands or the adjustment process. Now we're going to continue with real estate brokerage limited partnerships, and a key feature of it. We know the difference between general and limited partnerships. Is that general partners are equally responsible for each other. Limited partners are limited to the investment that they make within the company. They can't be sued beyond this point. They can't attack their personal assets. But what feature do we see in front of us? Actually, it kind of goes without saying. It says general partners within a real estate limited partnership who deal with the public and perform real estate services must be licensed as real estate what? Brokers. And you have to have at least one qualifying broker for that real estate brokerage corporation. And you can have sales associates running it. We talked about that feature. Next we have highest and best use. We know consulting is a component of real estate, and you can charge for providing your professional opinion, your advice to investors. And a question they might ask you is, what is the highest and best use for this property? What is the most profitable thing that I can construct here? Or imagine if it were vacant, what would be the most profitable thing in this position? Or what's the best use for it? You might have to get a reuse for that parcel. Let's continue. We already discussed that acronym. Do you remember? The escape procedures, MAIL, mediation, arbitration, litigation, escrow, disbursement, order. Next we see a tenancy at will. And specifically, we know what a tenancy at will is, right? It's a tenancy based on rent intervals, right? It's like a week-to-week or a month-to-month agreement, simplified. Month-to-month or week-to-week agreement. So we know what a month-to-month is, correct?
Right.
Renew on a monthly basis or a week-to-week, renew every week like an extended stay, right? But if you want to terminate a week-to-week agreement, how much prior notice must either party give, tenant or landlord? 7 days. If it's a month-to-month? 15 is what we see. When does the tax year begin? January 1st. This is when the property is assessed, lien is attached, and if you have any exemptions to file, what exemption am I really referring to? Homestead tax exemption, you can start filing there. You have to have owned the property prior to January 1st. You only have to file once. You have up to March 1st to get that filing in, or else you have to wait till next year for it to go into effect. But when do property taxes become due for the current year? Do you remember? November 1st. And you have up to when? April 1st of the next year to pay it before it becomes what? Delinquent or past due. Perfect. I don't agree with it necessarily, but next we see some features in regards to RESPA. I don't know if you remember, RESPA regulates the closing, the settlement of a real estate transaction and the money that's exchanged upon closing on a real estate transaction, like commissions and kickbacks and referral fees, fee splitting, unearned fees, rebates is sometimes what we call them. Can you pay an unlicensed person money for referral of real estate business? Can you pay an unlicensed person for performing real estate services? Can they perform real estate services without a license for compensation? No. Can you give a part of your commission to the buyer or seller within the real estate transaction?
Yes.
Yes. Can you split commission between you and another real estate professional?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes. Can you receive a kickback from a title company for bringing leads to them?
No.
No, you cannot. And we describe that as well. There is an exception to the rule for giving an unlicensed person money for referral of real estate business. Like, you can't give your friend a part of your commission because they brought you the deal. But if you're in an apartment complex and you bring a buddy to that same apartment complex, you can receive no more than how much cash? $50 cash is the rule. No more than this, or else it's a violation. Sometimes they find a way around the rule, and instead of giving you cash, they give you credit towards next month's rent. But I would still kind of stay away from that. We see advantages versus disadvantages of investing in real estate. Okay. Major advantage versus disadvantage. We see good rate of return, that's an advantage. Tax incentives, of course, for investing in real estate. We see hedge against inflation, leverage, and equity buildup. But a huge disadvantage is the illiquidity factor. Your real estate that you purchase, whether it's primary residence or an investment property, the only way you can get your money out of it is if you sell it, right? And you have to find somebody that's willing to pay your price as well and meet somewhere in the middle. So it's not just cash out whenever you want. It's not liquid for that reason like stocks. You can liquidate it any time. Need for expert help. If you don't have the expertise, you have to hire somebody. They don't work for free, and you have to manage the property. We know real estate, you got to mow the lawn, you got to maintain the property, there's upkeep, AC has to be serviced, and so on and so forth, and so many endless items. So if you can't do it, you have to hire somebody. Even though it's going to be charged to you, at least you don't have to deal with the hassle of chasing workers down and so forth. Let's continue. Now we see there are two theories of mortgage throughout our nation, either title theory or what's in front of us.
Lien theory.
Now, Florida is considered to be, for the most part, lien theory state. This really dictates, depending on what theory you subscribe to, who holds on to the deed while you're making mortgage payments. Now, here in Florida, who holds on to the deed? The borrower or the lender?
The borrower.
We do as the borrower. In return, what does the lender place against our property? A mortgage lien. The lien will remain until the debt is satisfied. Once the debt is satisfied, there's an obligation for the lender to record satisfaction in mortgage. Within how many days, do you remember? I'm just recapping. 60 days. So if you live in a lien theory state, they record satisfaction that removes that lien, that claim against your property. Liens are claims, if you remember this, usually out of a dollar amount. And if you live in a title theory state, we know until you satisfy the debt, the lender holds on to the deed. So if you satisfy your obligation, your financial obligation, they are going to record the deed into you and your family's name. That's how it works. And the time period is still the same, 60 days. Let's continue. Next we see statute of what? Statute of frauds. We know the statute of frauds requires that contracts conveying an interest in real estate, also contracts are not to be completed within the first year of the date created, must be what? In writing and signed to be enforceable in the court of law. That means if something goes wrong, be able to enforce it in front of a judge and so forth. So we have a list, right, of contracts that must meet the statute of frauds. Deeds, mortgage instruments. We talked about lease and listing agreements for a time period of more than a year. So that means that the lease is less than a year. It doesn't necessarily have to be in writing and signed, meet the statute of frauds to be enforceable in the court of law, if you follow. Okay? So statute of frauds, specifically, it's all about the in writing and signed to be enforceable. Just the fact that it's valid is all great, right? And to make a contract valid, it has to have 4 essential elements. Do you remember the 4 essential elements from when we discussed them? Number 1, starts with a C, it's competent parties. Individuals that are of sound mind and of legal what?
Age.
Of legal age. Exactly. We also had what?
2 witnesses.
We had offer and
Acceptance.
acceptance, exactly. This is mutual assent or a meeting of the minds. Something's offered within the contract, accepted by the other party. Legality of object has to be something legal you're doing in the contract. And the last is consideration out of those 4. And there's 2 types, valuable or good. Valuable is out of cash or things of value, and good consideration is in exchange for love and affection. But we added one more for real estate sale contracts, right? And that's the statute of frauds. Must be in writing and signed to be enforceable. So valid is one thing. To make a real estate sale contract enforceable, has to meet the statute of frauds. That's so important. You're going to have at least 2 or 3 questions about it. So that's why I really want to dig a little bit deeper into it. Now, the best relationship, in your opinion, out of the 3 that we recapped previously,
Single agent. No,
out of the no brokerage, single agency transaction broker is the one you want. And we already discussed the details of that. Next we see the methods that the Fed uses to stabilize Okay, I'm simply saying it, but they call it 3 economic tools of monetary policy. Monetary policy is the stabilization of our market to make sure we're not too good or too bad for an extended time period. So the most common method, they say, is open market operations, the buying and selling of bonds. If they make these bonds available to purchase at very attractive rates, who do you think wants to buy it? Well, everybody, even your bank, the same bank that you go to get financing to purchase your property. So if they're investing billions, there's less money that they have to lend to you, supply of money shrinks, interest rates therefore increase. We slowly enter into a tight money market. Think of your pockets being tight. On the opposite side, they buy back all of those IOUs, right? They pay the money back to those investors, plus gain whatever rate was promised. This pushes the supply of money back into our market, causing supply of money to increase, interest rates to therefore normally decrease, and we enter into an easy money market. The second method they use is a discount rate. This is the rate that the Fed charges to borrow money from them to the banks, all right, or whatever lending institution it is. And they charge them an upfront interest and an annual interest, and there's a calculation for that, but we're not going to get into it. If those rates are high, it's going to discourage the bank from borrowing funds. So that means supply of money will shrink, interest rates will therefore increase, banks are going to be more picky on who they give loans to, and we enter into a tight money market. If those rates are at an all-time low, bank is going to borrow as much money as they can while those rates are so attractive. Supply of money increases, interest rates decrease, easy money market. And the last method was the reserve requirement. This was the increase or decrease of the National Reserve, right? We know there's how many banking zones throughout the United States? There's 12 banking zones, and there's thousands of banks in each one that are federally regulated and have to abide by the increase or decrease. So if the Fed announces an increase, all the banks within each zone have to deposit whatever the Fed asks into the zone or into the depository within their zone. Supply of money decreases, interest rates increase, tight money market. This is the most abrupt or drastic method is what they call it. Least often used is what they say. And on the opposite side, they lower the reserve, supply of money increases, pushes the supply of money back into all the banks within their zone. Interest rates therefore decrease, easy money market. Or easy money market. Let's move on. Now that we're done recapping with that, let's continue. The next one is the LTV formula. You have the exact formula you need to memorize in order to solve that problem. Next we see down payment. We know almost every loan requires a down payment, but there is down payment assistance programs. There is 100% finance loans if you qualify for them. Not saying that they're always available. But the reason why people like to take advantage of FHA loans is because of the protection for the borrower, but because of this attractive down payment, as little as how much percent down? 3.5% down, so most people can come up with that. And even for that 3.5%, there's first-time home buyer program that will cover that as well. For conventional loans, I mean, even if it's conventional FHA, VA, the lender would like how much percent down?
20.
At least 20% down to give them confidence. That's enough skin in the game where they're like, okay, we trust this person. We don't have to charge them what? Mortgage insurance, right? If it's conventional, they call it PMI, private mortgage insurance. If it's an FHA loan, they call it MIP, mortgage insurance premium. There's a UFMIP and an annual MIP, but let's continue. I digress. Let's get back to what we see here next. Homeowners Association disclosure. I'll recap the items that you're going to be tested on and what we discussed in this unit. The HOA disclosure needs to be given to the buyer and signed in an acknowledgement form before they sign the sale contract. That's the rule. This is enforced by what Florida statute?
720.
720. Might be tested on that. And if they can prove they didn't sign the Homeowners Associated HOA disclosure beforehand, they have the right to void that contract, the sale contract, all the way to closing date, and that right cannot be waived by them, even if you think you're slick. The right to waive, well, that right cannot be waived. It remains all the way to closing date. So if the buyer says, I didn't receive the HOA disclosure before I signed the sale contract, and I didn't know about these rules, I didn't know how much, how often I needed to pay, so forth, this is a deal breaker, if you ask me. So they have the right to cancel the sale contract all the way to closing date for that reason.
Would it be on the closing disclosure?
If you what?
The amount of the HOA?
Or what about the amount of the HOA?
Would it be on the closing disclosure?
Oh yeah, it would. Yes. You would still want to confirm with the homeowners association to double check, because sometimes it's not always accurate.
So prior to them ratifying the contract, they have to have it?
Prior to them signing the sale contract, we have an executed sale contract. You need that HOA disclosure delivered. Usually how it works today is because we live in a world of technology. When you put a listing into the MLS, you can also attach files. So the files that you would want to attach, if it's part of an HOA, is the HOA disclosure. Also, the seller's disclosure, as we discussed, you would want to make sure that's on that list. So that way, when when an agent looks on this list, on behalf of a buyer, they can look at the attachments, click on that, get those filled out, signed by them, and then they prepare the sale contract to be submitted as the offer for consideration. Good questions. God bless you, there's two categories of mortgage, right? There's conventional loans. This is simply the explanation. Loans that are not backed by the government. And then non-conventional loans, loans that are backed by the government. What are the two non-conventional loans that we described? FHA what? Starts with I. Insured, and VA guaranteed. Don't forget that. We know FHA loans are insured by the government through a policy paid for by the borrower, and then VA loans are partially guaranteed through the Department of Veteran Affairs. So maybe this next portion might test you on how interest on an assumed mortgage is going to show up on your closing disclosure. Might just show up as a credit to who? Buyer, and a debit to the what?
Seller.
So you're going to have quite a few questions about the debits and the credits. Just remember, it's all about cash today that will help you answer any of those. Yes.
I still don't understand
The debits and the credits?
the purchase money mortgage.
Purchase money mortgage. This is
Yeah.
when
I know
the
what it
seller.
is. They owe mortgage on the property.
Well, the seller is financing. So instead of the bank taking on that debt and liability, it's the seller.
Okay.
So that amount, the purchase price, that if they would have gotten a loan from somebody else, that would have just been money in the seller's pocket. They would have been just credited the purchase price. But since they're financing it themselves, they're taking on the responsibility for holding the note and that financial obligation, collecting on that debt. So they're saying, okay, well, basically, you don't have to give money for your own property, but it kind of is in that sense. Do you understand what I'm saying?
So I sell you my property.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's use that as
for
an
100
example.
grand.
100,000.
And you pay me X month every month at what, 4.25%.
Yeah. So it's the reason why is because you're giving me essentially credit. It's like you giving me the loan. So it's going to be debited from you.
Oh, okay, I get it now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And since the
It's like
closing
taking money
disclosure
from the
breaks
seller.
down buyer and seller, and you just so happen to be also giving the loan, then it's going to show up as a debit to you and a credit to me. It's a little bit funky, I get it, but hopefully that will help you better understand. Let's move on to what we see next. How long must you retain records for?
5 years.
5 years. What if it's a failed transaction? Must you still retain the records?
5 years.
Yes, sir, for 5 years. The procedure is to place it in a dead or failed to close file and maintain it within the brokerage office.
What if the office closes? They just transfer it to whatever new location?
That would be sufficient, yeah.
That could be good.
All right. What is this next piece of information here? It says violation of the Fair Housing Act. Okay, the Fair Housing Act just covers the following. remember, if there's any type of discrimination, the individual can be sued, right? And it's based on violation of this act. We have the Fair Housing Act. It's a federal law. It's under the Civil Rights Act. And the Civil Rights Act of 1866 is still in force today. But we know that it was updated to include additional protections. Think of how to spell the words fresh corn, then remove the vowels. You have FRSHCRN, familial status. We have race, sex, handicap status, color, religion, and nationality. So just don't discriminate and you're good, right? If you know that somebody is discriminating, who would you report to? Do you remember? No. I mean, if they have a license, yes, you could report to the beeper, but if it's based on discrimination specifically, whose job is it to promote fair housing for all? It's the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, is who you would submit a complaint to. Just throwing that out there. Now, that's a federal law, right? These Federal Fair Housing Act. But in Florida, we created the Florida Fair Housing Act that makes it easier to enforce against an individual that you know is discriminating. Let's continue. To become a broker, you have to be active with a what?
Broker.
With a broker. What's the time frame? Do you remember the time frame? At least how many years? 2 years within how much of a time frame? 5 years. Now what you see in front of you is the various ways you can earn that 2 years within 5 years. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Florida broker. It could be another state, could be another foreign jurisdiction. Can you earn experience by being active with an owner-developer?
No.
No, the experience is out the window if that's the case.
Can you give me an example of an owner-developer?
Unlicensed entity that sells, leases, or exchanges its own property. So big-time home builder, or it could be a timeshare company. A lot of timeshare companies are classified as owner-developers, and that's how they operate. So they build a resort themselves, and then they sell their own, or
That's a
lease
lot.
out their own inventory.
That's a lot.
Yeah. If we continue next, we see what type of license? Group license. Yes, group license. We know this group license status is given to you if you're a sales associate that's active with an owner-developer. We just got done talking about an owner-developer and what they are, right? We know owner-developers may have different business entities all operating under the same umbrella, right? The same corporation. So they got Lennar Homes at, I don't know, let's say South Orlando, Lennar Homes at North Orlando, East Orlando, and so forth. They have all of these communities and developments. If they want you to sell for all of those affiliated entities, they will do this on your behalf, put you on a group license status. When they make you active, they will write down all of those entities that you would operate within. Next, we have the two different types of notice for transfer of title to legal property, or legal transfer of title to property, making it a form of voluntary alienation, delivered and received by a grantee. The grantee, need they be competent for receiving the deed?
No.
Oh, yes, only a competent grantor in front of two witnesses must sign the instrument, but the person receiving the deed need not to be competent or even sign the deed. Do you remember this?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you may even give property to your what? To your kids, for instance. Maybe a pet, God forbid.
Mm-hmm.
But actual notice is me signing the deed over to you and your family, you accepting it, that's good enough. But constructive notice is recording in the public records. And in order to do so, you have to make the deed acknowledged. Well, you have to have the deed acknowledged, which means notarized. Next, what's the opposite of northwest 45 degrees? Southeast 45 degrees. That's it. Okay, you guys should be fine for that one. Okay, we actually talked about the next one as well. And the following one, satisfaction of mortgage. We recapped that as well. Next, we see types of business entities. DeBeeper says, congratulations, you're a broker. You're allowed to open up your own brokerage office. The rule is that all active brokers are required to have an office and to register with them, pay the appropriate brokerage registration fees. Okay. Is there any limit to the amount of offices one broker can be responsible for? No. Okay, we know brokers can have hundreds of offices. Every office has to be registered separately and issued its own what? License. So therefore brokers can have multiple what? Licenses. So that's besides what we see in front of us. But DeBeeper says only certain entities can open up a brokerage office or register with us and be issued a license. So you'll see the list of the ones that can versus the ones that cannot. Is there any concerns on these? So the ones that cannot, joint venture is a temporary, corporation sole is ecclesiastical religious organizations.
Business trust.
Yeah, business trust. Business trust is selling your own. They receive an exemption to licensure, so that's unacceptable. And on the other side, the ones that may, these are, God bless you, typical business entities that we would register in the state of Florida, sole proprietorships, LLCs, corporations, and so forth. Let's move on. Would you be allowed as a sales associate to register yourself as an LLC?
Yes. under
Yes,
Social
you
Security
can.
number.
Yes, using your social, you can accomplish that. And there's websites that allow you to do it in the state of Florida, very easy. Next is math. We're gonna skip that. That's the formula you need to know. All right. There's only one example of a first-degree misdemeanor in real estate. That's selling inaccurate rental information or providing inaccurate, outdated rental information for a fee. But if you give it away for free, no liability, you feel me. One of us got it, all right. So if you do sell this inaccurate rental list and it caused somebody loss, right, or harm, it could, financial loss. What is the penalty that follows this violation? Do you remember?
Yeah.
What was it? 111.
and then
First degree misdemeanor.
1 year.
How much of a fine? $1,000 fine and or up to 1 year imprisonment.
$1,000 fine equates to a year in jail.
In this case, it does.
Now that's what can happen to you. In their case, they got 100% of the money back.
Interest or estate being conveyed. Check this out. On the deed, remember what the deed is. It's the physical representation of your title. It's this piece of paper, this legal evidence of title, but it also paints the picture of what took place on the day of the closing and how ownership changed hands from one company or individual to another. So it paints this wonderful picture, including what we see this section called the habendum clause. The official is habendum etiendum, to have and to hold from this day forward. It talks about duration of ownership that you're providing to that grantee, the person receiving the deed, right? So there are two forms of this that you would provide. It's the two types of freehold estates. Do you remember freehold?
Fee simple.
Indefinite ownership. So fee simple, the one you want, or the one that starts with an L,
Life.
life estate for a person's lifetime.
Oh, you got to start that financing.
No.
But certain things could affect that lifetime one.
Of course, yeah.
Thanks, so.
If you don't pay your property taxes, right? You could lose your fee simplest or freehold
And you get
estate.
tax lien.
Vacating premises. The tenant, their lease agreement ends, and they might want what back? The security deposit, okay? And if there's no damages, they're entitled to it within how many days? 15 days. If there are damages, it's going to stretch out the time period to how many days?
30.
30 days,
And
and
then
within 30
state the
days, the
claim.
landlord should provide a list of all the damages, what it costs to repair, maybe estimates and so
Above and
forth,
after
and
wear
if
and
they're gonna
tear.
claim all or part of the deposit to take care of that. If it exceeds 30 days and you don't receive anything, they're not in compliance, they need to return that deposit to you, as we described. And this is covered under the Landlord and Tenant Act, Florida Landlord and Tenant Act. We already talked about the recovery fund, the next one is MAV. Next one following that, involuntary inactive licensees. Involuntary inactive is a result that is something outside of your control, causes your license to be inactive. One example of this, not that it's in front of us, but if you're working for a broker, but the broker's license you're working for is suspended or revoked, is that going to affect you as a sales associate
Yes.
working for them? Your status will be involuntary inactive until they fix the problem or replace the broker. We talked about this too for corporations. Within 14 calendar days, right?
Find temporary.
You could find a temporary one, an interim broker, within 60 days to take their place until you fix the problem. We are also discussed that. But what we see here in front of us is that if you're late to do your second or subsequent renewals, what's your first renewal called, by the way? Yes, it's your post-license course. I mentioned that you should do it immediately to protect your license. If you are late by 1 day for your post, what happens to your license becomes null and what? Void, and once you requalify as if you've never had a license. Okay. So involuntary inactive is if you're late to do your second or subsequent. What is that renewal called? Your second or subsequent? 14-hour CE. What does CE stand for? Continuing education. If you're late, they cut you some slack. You don't completely lose your license, but until you renew, involuntary inactive, right? That's what we see in front of us. How long could your license be involuntary inactive before you completely lose it? Well, we'll see that in just a second. There's a time period here first, on the first bullet point. If you're 12 months or less being late, they're going to make you do your 14 hours, pay a renewal fee, and they're going to charge you a late fee. If you're over 1 year but less than 2, they double everything. Instead of 14 hours, 28, reactivation course is what it's called. Double your fees, double your fines. If you're over 2 years being late, null and void. Must start all over again, but they give you plenty of slack if you think about it. Civil Rights Act 1866 is to protect us against discrimination based on race and race only. Anything more than race, now we're talking about 1968. That will help you with the dates that you need to remember.
Would you say anything more than hate? We're talking about 1968?
Anything more than race.
Oh, sorry. That's what he said. Oh, that's good.
Okay, can you be active with any, you could be active with any broker, but can you be active with more than one broker?
Not at the same time.
Yes. We know that you can only be active with one employing broker at any given time, or owner-developer.
One is salaried.
You could be salaried with an owner-developer and active with a broker, but those companies are not going to like it. Probably a violation of company policy and maybe just terminate you. You got to know something about this, the appraisal industry, the Appraisal Qualifications Board, AQB. What purpose do they serve? Establishes what? Minimum
Criteria for state certified appraisers.
Yes, and also
Endorses
Endorses
uniform
uniform
examination.
it's the examinations too, yes. We know appraising is an art, not a science, even though it uses mathematical calculations to figure out the value of the property. It's not 100% accurate. As we know, it's an opinion given by a skilled appraiser. Like the saying goes, who has an opinion? Everybody has their 2 cents and wants to throw it in. So your estimate of value might not be the same as mine, but that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And as a sales associate, you can't represent yourself as a state certified or licensed appraiser. You can't provide an appraisal that requires an appraiser's license, and that's a completely separate license once again, okay? Only appraisers can prepare appraisals. As an alternative, we can give estimates of value, we can charge for it, but it would either be a CMA. What does CMA stand for? Comparative Market Analysis, or BPO, which is broker what? Price opinion. Can we charge? Yes, but only a flat what?
Fee.
Based on the time and difficulty of the work, not a commission.
But do we want to charge? No.
No, just a convenience, courtesy to your client. Did we talk about FHA versus VA loans?
Yes.
What's the similarity, major similarity between both of those? Well, they do not, neither of them contain a due on sale clause. Do you remember the due on sale clause?
Yeah.
Okay, the due on sale clause, simplified, is debt to the lender is due upon sale. So that means you don't have to satisfy the debt upon sale. If it does have the due on sale clause, the lender says you got to pay it all off. You can't just transfer the debt. So FHA VA loans could be transferable. They're assumable for that reason. You don't necessarily have to qualify in the same way the original borrower qualified. But if you don't want to be financially tied to them, then they need to meet the same qualifications you met when you originated the loan, or better. You don't have to be a veteran to take over a VA loan, interesting enough, even by non-veterans. We already talked about HOA disclosure. We talked about what we see next for deductions for primary residence. Following that, we see a buyer's market versus a seller's market. When the supply-demand equilibrium is upset by excess supply, This creates a what type of market? Okay, so I basically said that seesaw is upset by more supply than demand. So if there's more supply than demand, what tends to happen to the price? Goes down. Now's the time to buy it, right? Buy low, sell high. If there's a high demand but not much of it available, then is a time to sell. That's the seller's market. So that's the difference there. Let's continue. Let's talk about the 3 types of concurrent ownership. We know concurrent ownership is co-ownership, correct? All right. So, sole ownership is how many people own the property? 1. This is known as an estate in severalty, severed off from everybody else. In Florida, when in regards to marriage, anything you purchase before the marriage is yours. Anything you purchase during marriage is a marital asset, going to get distributed equitably, which means fairly. But concurrent ownership, just to stay on track here, which is 2 or more people own the property together. The first one is tenants in what? Tenants in common. 2 or more people own the property together. Each person, imagine we're all tenants in common. We can have the same percentage or different percentages. We can become owners at different times. We don't have to be distribute ownership at the same time. If I die as a tenant in common, what happens to my percentage? It goes to my what?
Heirs.
Legal heirs. Tenants in common does not have the right of survivorship. But the other 2 do. So joint tenancy, 2 or more people, of course it's co-ownership. Imagine we're all joint tenants. We have to have the same exact share, okay? And that means we have to become owners at the same time. That's the only way to do the math properly. And if I die as a joint tenant, what happens to my share now? It gets distributed equally among the surviving joint tenants. This is called the right of survivorship. Whoever survives, thrives, as we described. And if you want to, as a joint tenant, can you sell your share to somebody else?
Yes.
Yeah. But whoever you sell your share to, since they're not one of the original, they can never be a joint tenant with the original. They will be considered a tenant in common without the right of survivorship. So if they pass away, it's going to go to their heirs. If one of the original passes away, it stays with the surviving joint tenants. And then tenancy by the entireties is the same thing as joint tenancy, but it's between a married couple. One spouse passes, surviving spouse receives their ownership. Any questions? No? Okay. If you specialize in buying, selling, leasing businesses, they call you a what type of broker?
Business broker.
A business broker. Is that a separate license?
No.
No, it's just your title. We already talked about selling your share as a joint tenant. We know what a net lease is, net, triple net lease sometimes called. It's where a tenant pays a monthly rent, sometimes rent per square foot, plus an additional amount for CAM, common area maintenance. Parking lot, garbage pickup, and so forth. All right, if you pass away and you have a will in your possession, you're a man, they call you a what? They call you a testator. If you're a woman, they call you a testatrix. Don't ask me why. So you can separate yourself based on the details in your will to, you can separate yourself from real property or personal property, correct? If you separate yourself from real property, give me an example of this. You separate yourself from real property. What's an example of real property?
Like
House.
Yeah, house, yeah, piece of land, right?
Separate
Condo on the
yourself.
beach or whatever it is. So a deeded piece of property. You could do that in a will. And the actual real property is called devise. Person receiving is a devisee. You got to know this. What you hear most common on TV shows and movies and so forth is separating yourself from personal property, like money. It's the most common example. The person receiving, the money itself is bequest, and the person receiving is a beneficiary. Okay. So, to wrap things up, because the last questions are what? Our math, and you have all the formulas there. So you guys, we are done with our review, but there's a few things that I want to cover with you. Starting from today, good thing I'm recording this, because there's always students that say, oh, well, you didn't tell us on the first day or last day of class. Yes, I always do. Never forget. not a class where I forgot. Starting from today, you have 30 days to wrap up everything with us, right? So that means making up any classes if you miss any. Hopefully you didn't. But if you do, you have to come back making them up. And it's not about the hours, it's about the units you're missing. So you got to come back. It's not like just independently studying for 4 hours. No, you have to come back and make up the units you missed. You have to complete all your lab hours. What's the way to do that? Submit it through the system, right? And schedule, take your final exam with us. If it exceeds 30 days and those things are not done, you lose everything. You have to start all over again. Do not let it happen to you. There's no reason why it should. The sooner you take your exam, the better. If you feel prepared by Monday to take it and the availability is there, great, okay? You have the ability to do so. I mean, if the scheduling and it all works out. I don't know if you scheduled when you got the link beforehand. But I suggest no longer than a week from today to prepare for your final exam. And I always get the question, what about the state exam? I suggest no longer than 2 weeks following the passing of our final to prepare for the state. Because the longer you wait, the more information you what? You lose. That is there's so many studies that have been done on this. I mean, Harvard did several studies on it alone. The forgetfulness of people for information that's not used on a daily basis. Yes. Exactly. So there's a reason why these sayings and phrases exist.
From the short to the long.
So what are you going to do when it comes time to taking your final exam? Remember, we give you a calculator, something to write on. We give you how many hours to complete your final exam with us? 3 hours. You need to get a what grade to pass?
70.
Your first attempt,
70 or higher.
provided you only need one attempt, is 70% or higher. Guys, come on. This is your best opportunity to pass. Know the study guide, you're going to pass the final exam. Not questions and answers, but it's exactly what you need to study. Focus on that alone. Find a study buddy. I noticed, based on doing this for over a decade, that students that form study groups, like all of you that meet at Panera Bread, Starbucks, and so forth, before and after class, they are successful. More so than the student that independently studies for their final exam. Not saying that you need people to rely on, but it does help. Support system, always. Maybe you have somebody at home that's able to help you with testing you on this information. That's a good idea. A lot of you made flashcards, great. Writing and saying will help you retain. Repetition is one of the best ways to retain information. So I'm okay with you completing your final exam in an hour and submitting the test because, I mean, you practically know what you are going to be tested on, all right? The content you're going to be tested on. But for the state exam, they give you how much time? 3.5 hours. Okay, prepare mentally to be there for 3.5 hours.
Keep your butt
okay?
in the seat.
Yeah, keep that butt in the seat. And if you finish in an hour and a half, great. Go over your exam again and again and again until you feel completely confident. Exhaust all of the time possible. What's your passing grade for your state exam need to be?
75%.
75% high. If you fail our final exam, how many attempts do you get? You only get 2. Second attempt, that's it. You need 75% or higher, and you had to wait at least 30 days to take it for the second time. You have up to a year to take it your second time, but don't do that to yourself. You fail the second time, you have to start all over again. Okay? Remember, you guys, the sooner you get the license, the better, based on what's going on out there and based on the content you learned, while the information is still fresh in your minds, the ether of you still being in class. On behalf of everybody here at CARE, you don't know how proud I am of you guys and how exciting this class was for me. One of the best evening classes I had in a long time. A lot of jokes, a lot of laughs, a lot of entertainment, great conversation back and forth. I got to learn a little bit more about you. Hopefully, this is not the end of the story. Hopefully, the story continues. I get to see you in the future. You let me know when you get your license. You let me know when you get your first bonus check. You had $60,000 check off of your first deal, right?
Right.
You'll be paying it to me when I'm with Cameron Realty.
And don't be afraid to bring me a little gift, okay?
Oh.
I'm just kidding.
Nothing of value though. Like a thank you. You were my inspiration.
No, this is enough for me. This is what gets me going, okay? This is what I do it for. Seeing you guys successful. I don't ask for anything in return. I just like you guys to come back and let me know how you're doing. That's it. So with that being said, on behalf of everybody at CARE, we are, man, I told myself I wouldn't cry. But but I thank you so much. You made my job that much easier. and I am excited for your future in this profession. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah.
Clap it up for
you.
yourself. Okay. Oh, I'm still recording.